are waiting people to come from the coffee break, and they will listen to you, and more people will listen to you from YouTube and from Zoom link. And okay, I think it will work.
It will work out. We'll figure it out. It's all good.
Okay. Will you share any presentation, by the way?
No, I actually thought not. I only thought of talking and saying hello, because it gets a little bit boring when there's like a big screen and there's like a little window. So I just thought I will just be talking.
Okay, because then otherwise I can ask for the share screening thing. I
No
don't know
worries.
if it works or not.
No worries. No worries.
Okay.
Oldu.
Yes, Otto. Dear Otto, you're very welcome. I am very pleased to have you and present you. I give a introductory information about your speech and you, but it's not sufficient to explain you, of course. So it's your word, please. We are looking forward to listen your approach about vitalism.
All right. Well, thank you, Sherlyn, and thank you for inviting me. Am I coming through well? Does it sound? Okay, perfect. Then we take it from here. Yes, my name is Otto von Busch. I'm professor in integrated design here at Parsons School of Design in New York. I haven't been in İzmir, I met Sherlyn. There's some echo. Is it working? Perhaps you need to mute yourself. No, I don't know. I don't know what's going on. Okay. Shall I say something and we see if the sound is working? Is it going okay? All right. Do you hear me, Sherlyn? Okay, very good. Let's take it from here. Thank you so much for also surviving technological issues and also for seeing me on a Zoom screen, which is not the most exciting thing to do when you can meet live. I know, and we've been doing this now for some years, so I hope everything is fine with you guys. Yes, vitalism. What a fascinating topic. I hope you are as excited about vitalism as I am. And I am not going to be speaking about vitalism as a sort of a school of philosophy. I am not going to be sort of, addressing Spinoza and Deleuze and all sort of philosophers of vitalism. What I think fascinating with vitalism is that it does sort of shift the perspective a little bit on our perspective on design, who we design for, what is the purpose of design. And what it also does is that it in many ways questions our sort of thoughts around sustainability. So my first question when it comes to sustainable design is, what is to be sustained? Which I think is a question we should perhaps ask more often when we address sustainability. Because when we talk about sustainable design, we often just sort of take for granted that we're just going to sustain what is already happening, what is already sort of what we can call sort of default consumerism. And this is, of course, a tricky part when we come to design in general, because most design schools and most curricula around design are sort of shaped by the modernist project. It's shaped by everything, of course, from the very influential Bauhaus curriculum for educating designers to this, the ontology, the purpose of design is often subscribed within consumerism. Most often what we design in design school and what we learn and teach our students to design are objects to be mass produced for the industry to sustain, consumerism, to sustain industries and design for industries that's going to sell stuff. And this causes, some sort of, soul searching within the design profession and design education. Does everything have to become objects? Does everything have to become products? Can we figure out other ways to produce a healthy society and help and have people, living good lives in society without necessarily materializing every object, every relationship? At the same time, of course, we have huge populations that have too little objects and too little access to things. So it's, of course, we have, deep also troubles of injustices as we are trying to start tweaking the sort of default setting of consumerism. Because, of course, it sets, we immediately approach, like, who should be having access to good design? Who should be having access to sustainable materials, etc.? And my approach to this comes through the lens of fashion, because that's, we've been mainly sort of teaching fashion classes and writing around sort of the realm of fashion. And of course, that's also where perhaps the question of sustainability has become most, urgent in many ways, because the way that default fashion operates with new seasons, new launches, new drops, etc. So there's a continuous flow of goods. And since fashion is not necessarily functional in the way that we often think of other products, because it has sort of a planned obsolescence that it continuously churns out new collections, of course, the unsustainability of that field is what has been, on the sort of the radar, or on, in the spotlight of so much of discussions around sustainability. So this is where, to me, the question of vitalism also comes to its forefront, because it asks the question, what is to be sustained? When we talk about sustainable fashion, what is it we want to make sustainable in fashion to start with? Are we living in some sort of fashion utopia right now, that the only problem with fashion is that it is, it produces environmental pollution? It is as if you sort of look away from, environmental, work environments, work issues, labor issues. We look away from elitism and, the unjust distribution of goods. We're also looking away from everything from washes to, the way that we live with garments. Is this continuous sort of churning out of new products, is it really the best way we can imagine living with fashion? So when we ask what should be sustained, what is it really we want to save, if you want to say so, in fashion? It just asks us to take a step back to think about, what does fashion do at its best? And how do we make sure that the best emotion, the best things that can happen in fashion, we make that sustainable, and we try to sort of mitigate a bit of the troublesome stuff when it comes to fashion consumerism. But what is it about sort of default consumerism that we need to sort of question them? That sort of asks us, perhaps, what is the problem with sustainability in general right now, or a lot of the discourse around sustainability? We can say that at least there's a few, handful of problems around it. But one is, for example, the perpetuating idea of solutionism that is there in sustainable fashion. The idea is that, well, if we can just sort of solve sustainability, then consumerism and the way it operates in our world is really fine. Meaning that if we just sort of do a little eco-cotton here, a little better other types of fibers there, we sort of fix something with the washing cycles and the toxic dyes, everywhere there's a small technological fix that we can, if we just sort of accumulate them all up and make all these small fixes better and better and better and better, better, then in the end we will have a sustainable and a good fashion system. The troublesome part with that sort of solutionism is that perhaps the problem is actually on a much deeper level than only small fixes here and there, that it leaves out, well, the way of logistics, the way that we actually, where do we encounter fashion? What does fashion do to us in the sense of, why is it that we need people to tell us what to wear? What is it in the sort of the psychological realm of fashion that we also need to address this on? So solutionism, the technological solutionism, only answers very, very limited project problems of a much larger issue that we should perhaps as designers try to address. Another issue that is common, especially in fashion and sustainability around fashion is that there's a sort of an idea of that stagnation means good, that if we just make people more aware that they shouldn't buy too much and they should keep things longer and we should be slower and we should, there's a lot of sort of ideas that we could try to sort of limit the amount of consumption that we do. They limit the amount of production, limit the amount of goods that are flowing. Perhaps that is more sustainable. Well, on one sense, yes, of course. But it also reduces the potential that fashion has. What it does is, to take an example, if we want to reduce the amount of consumption, we want things to last longer. We want things to be, to have people not consume so much, but repair and so on. That is a good thing. We should not, but at the same time, what comes with that is very strict hierarchies, The Queen or King of England has lived in the same house most of their lives. Most people, they don't change their cars, their Jaguars or Rolls Royces very often. So if you are very rich, if you are at the top of society, it is easy to be sustainable. Whereas if you're on your way up, if you're trying to get somewhere in society, then consumerism is a way for you to move away from your past. Everybody wants to inherit a Chanel bag. Not everyone wants to inherit the copy or a plastic bag or something like that. Everybody wants to live in a castle and inherit a castle. Nobody wants to inherit the little shack or the homeless, sleeping bag under a bridge or something. So there's a strict hierarchy and stratification of where this solution of repair and slowness and so on, who it favors. And we just need to be aware of that by embracing these approaches, we are also limiting the possibility for other people to, for huge populations to be able to move in society. And we just need to sort of be careful there that we don't think that one type of approach here is going to solve for every social strata. Another thing that's related to that is sort of the third common issue that is coming back over and over, and that is the question of awareness. And if we just make people aware of sustainability, if we make them aware of how unsustainable their consumption is, then they will become better people, and they will be, consume less unsustainably in that sense. That means that there are people that are just a little bit more enlightened about this than others. And often here, again, the tricky part is that, well, it's easy because if you are rich, you can consume sustainable goods. You can repair and have a sustainable awareness and a sustainable morality, if you want to say so. Much easier than people who are in the need of consumption. So there's a moral imperative that happens in the way we often speak about sustainability. If we only teach the poor people that they shouldn't be buying so much unsustainable things from H&M or Zara or wherever they buy them, if we only fix them, then it will be sustainable, So there's a sort of a Victorian type of moralization there that we just need to be careful about, because it may not be what we, what we really want to do. Do you hear me? We just need to be careful there of what we are, to who we are speaking in these situations. So those are some of the issues around sustainability. I hope I got through and that there wasn't too much interference with my voice and the noise. Who knows? That was the beginning of what the problems are, what we need to address or think of, be more careful about when we talk about sustainability. This is where vitalism could be one approach, just to sort of, for us to sort of take a step back, to think about, well, what needs to be sustained is perhaps, life. And a vital, meaning, a feeling of aliveness and the dynamics and agency that comes with aliveness. Could we try to make this feeling and the emotions of aliveness thriving at the center, rather than try to sort of ability towards like, how do we maximize vitalism? How do we make vital, relationships and vital emotions, and take that at the center of what we're trying to achieve with our sustainable design or our design work? So think again, how do we make fashion industry, for example, serve life rather than serve the industry? How would that shift the way that we look at what it is we're doing as designers in that sense? So vitalism is in that sense quite related to biomimicry, which has been one approach that is in sustainable design that sort of tries to learn from nature and exactly biomimicry. How do we sort of imitate living patterns and structures from evolutionary systems and make understand those better to try to implement them in the way that our societies and our design frameworks work. Unfortunately, a lot of biomimicry basically tries to serve the current industry. So by basically trying to make things more compostable or perhaps more structurally sound and so on. But we could think that could we also shift the perspective a little bit from the structures in biomimicry towards a vitalist biomimicry, meaning that what we're trying to imitate in biology and in biological systems is not only the structures and so on, but they're striving for life and their sense of thriving, meaning that they are, these are systems that are, in the process of growth, and where growth is what they're trying to do, if you want to say. So, okay, so let's just take a step back and look at, well, what are sustainable practices out there, and is all design, can everything be sustainable? And of course, on one sense, yes, well, many things are not sustainable. I often use, what should we, as fashion designers, learn from? We could compare fashion design then to a few different other professions that I find fascinating. So one thing is to look at baking and baking bread and making sweets. I often say that, well, if clothes that we, the clothes that we all wear, that perhaps is like bread in many ways. It's something that we need because of climate and because of various types of cultures of shame, etc., etc. So clothes is sort of the starch diet of what we do as designers, as fashion designers. We have to make clothes in some way, but we also do the sweets. We also do the sugar. And the sugar that the baker does, in a sense, that is what fashion is in many ways. Fashion is that sprinkling of sweets that is just makes clothes just a little bit more, pleasurable for us in our everyday lives. Is it healthy? Perhaps not. But at the same time, it really gives, a sense of, of sensorial pleasures in so many ways. We cannot only eat it, but it's also something we shouldn't deny, that it gives us great pleasures in so many ways. And our bakers, should they stop making sweets? I'm not so sure. Perhaps we just need to sort of, think about when should we have the sweets in the days, and how do we brush our teeth later better, and so on. But another sort of unsustainable but tricky, profession is the florist. People who make flower arrangements. The sort of hardcore sustainable person would sort of go in and say, we don't need florists. Isn't it more beautiful having the flowers growing in nature and in the garden or something like that? Why should we have flower arrangements? It's all waste. Yes, we can make it more sustainable. We can perhaps grow them better and so on. But basically, it is all, waste. Don't have freshly cut flowers. But at the same time, it gives us a great sense of beauty. It teaches us something about the sensorial pleasures of beauty and the sensorial pleasures of nature by bringing them inside. Unfortunately, they die inside our house, but they do bring us great pleasure. How do we sort of think about, of course, we can make some of these professions more sustainable in many ways, but at their very root, the search for pleasure and the search for this kind of sense of abundance is not necessarily sustainable. We just need to figure out ways that sort of balance it towards the the pleasures that we get from it, the sense of growth that I may get from having access to these things, and learning to grow my, my sensory tentacles, my sensory attunement to the world through these kind of practices. So unfortunately, there is a lot of waste that happens there, but there is also, a growing a sense of pleasure that comes from that. So let's just take a step back. Okay, great. So that was just about, where does vitalism, the sense of growth, the sense of a growing sensory field and pleasure and attachment to the world stand in relationship to sustainability? So it's easy to first think of vitalism mainly that something that concerns nature, that it should be mainly concerned like sustainability in so many ways. We need to save species, we need to save the trees, we need to save the rivers from toxins, etc., the environment. But we should also think that vitalism and sustainability then happens in more realms than that. And I have been very inspired by a theorist called Felix Guattari, but who's been talking about sort of the three ecologies. And the basic argument here is that we too often think of sort of environmentalism and sustainability happening mainly in nature. And we can sort of disconnect our social and cultural realms and our own psyches in many ways from this. And he argues that we cannot, that we need to think of these ecologies as connected. And he argues there are three ecologies, and that's something that I will sort of dive deeper into here. So let's start with the natural environment, the natural ecology. Look at this, I built it out of Legos from my kids' things. So this is my presentation here. Here we have the the natural environment, or or the elemental ecology, if you want to say so. And this is what we most often think of when we're going to think about sustainability, meaning limit pollution, save the animals and species, trying to exactly have a less footprint onto the planet and the planetary boundaries that we need to act within. But again, this is only one of the ecologies, and we can barely sort of, we have to think of what capitalism and consumerism has done is that it thinks it can endlessly extract resources from this environment and also, of course, pollute it. And that is the problems that we're having. But everything that is extracted here and made from these materials are also entering the other ecologies. And the other ecologies is, for example, the social ecology, which is the realm of our world, our human world, of social relationships and so on, But here is also, within social relationships, this triggers, what consumerism does and the extraction from nature is that it produces also status hierarchies within or between us, So consuming more means that you have a higher status and so on, So the extraction, the more I can extract, the more land I own, etc., the more, footprint, if you want to say so, I have on the natural environment traditionally, the better, the higher status I have in the social ecology. So we also need to see that what happens in the natural ecology or the elemental ecology affects and is deeply entangled to our social ecology. So for example, my status, the way that I live, the way that I practice, the way that I relate myself to other human beings is deeply entangled in the way that the relationship I have to nature and the relationship I can afford to have to nature, the natural ecology. But also the social ecology is also connected to the mental ecology, or what we can call sort of, our imaginal ecology, if you want to say so, that it is the world of our imagination. It's the world where also I am, the many persons I am. I am a father, I am a teacher, I am, etc., etc. So we are many personas that we present to ourselves, to the world. But also each of these personas have a sort of exactly a mental ecology. They are all dependent on self-esteem, on these kind of intangible feelings of self-worth, of feeling belonging, and these kind of things, which we feel of, as we think of them as psychological ecologies, if you want to say so. But again, these are tied back into the social ecology, that if people look up to me, perhaps I have a better self-esteem. If people treat me well in these social ecologies, I have better, feeling of self-worth. If people are welcoming, I have a better sense of belonging. So the ecologies are all entangled with each other, and we cannot fix nature alone. We need to think of how nature is then connected to the social realm and to the psychological realm, the mental realm. So we need to think that my feeling of self-worth is not something that sort of hangs loose only within the psychological realm and sort of floats free of sustainability. The way that, what our consumerism and our default settings of capitalism in so many ways have done is that my sense of self-worth, my feeling of being a good person or a person that has any worth in my life is unfortunately very connected to how much I can extract out of nature. What capitalism and consumerism has done is that our feeling, our deep emotional lives are totally dependent on unfortunately, the relationships we have to the planet in many ways. So thinking that toxins, all these things are not isolated issues that could just we can handle with a bit of solutionism. Because my inner realms are deeply connected exactly down to, through capitalism and down to our extractive practices and so on. So this comes back to the question then of vitalism here, in a sense. How can we think of thriving within these different ecologies, but without having to sort of freeze them and again, come that we can, let's have a little bit more of social relationships and a little sense of community in the social realm, and everything will be fine. If I'm just having a little bit more of belonging, then we will solve this one. And Otto, go and see a therapist if you don't feel good about yourself. All of these are small solutions that tries to address these issues, the troublesome issues in isolation. But how can we think of them as interconnected? As designers, think of, it's not about trying to limit and solve each isolated issue, but make us thrive within each of the three ecologies in some way. How can we think of that I, as a person, can feel a sense of growth, not by sort of consuming more and more things, but in the relationship I have to nature, the way that I'm sort of interacting with nature, the way I interact with other people. And I feel that I am, with my interactions with people, I am actually in a process of growth. I am not a victim of their judgments and so on, Similarly here in the mental realm, if you want to say so, also here, I can feel that I'm, in a sense, I'm a growing sense of belonging, I have a growing sense of self-esteem. And this, of course, connects back to fashion and the way that fashion traditionally sort of operates, because fashion, again, as I said, it's a practice that is deeply troublesome in so many ways from a perspective of sustainability, because it continuously churns out new collections and so on. But also as a profession, as a designer, I need you to continuously come back to me to buy new things. I will never solve your consumerism, and I don't want to do that as a fashion designer, because that would make me unemployed. I really don't want to sort of heal you, if you want to say so. It's a very perverted type of, a doctor knows, because in the end, we're all going to be aging, we're going to be sick and die, So a doctor tries to cure you temporarily, but the doctor, of course, also knows that one day Otto will come back, because we are all, in bodies that are decomposing and slowly dying. I can cure you from what you're having right now, but I'll see you later down the road. For a fashion designer, the fashion designer doesn't really want to wait that long. A fashion designer needs me to come back as a consumer every season. So a fashion designer only needs to build up my feeling of self-esteem and my feeling of belonging, my feeling of the good things in fashion for only so long, because I want you to come back and buy more of my stuff. So you want to produce a little bit of addiction, hopefully. A good fashion designer produces good addiction, meaning that you want to come back for more and more and more, and you have to come back because otherwise you feel bad about yourself. So there's something sort of deeply perverted within sort of the way that we relate to these fields as a profession. So how do we sort of change the scope there? What if we were not trying to thrive on people's bad esteem, but actually try to work much closer to, as a doctor, if you want to say so, or coach, or a therapist, or someone that actually tries to make people feel a sense of growth rather than thriving on their bad self-esteem and their, and the tensions of their social relationships. So again, to just take a step back then, how do we sort of promote thriving within each of these realms? Yes, the thriving of life in nature, more, diversity and, not trying to sort of, kill off everything that is not, productive for our very sort of industrial mindset towards nature. But also, could we sense a sense of growth in the sense of community and whatever, the social relationships that we have? How do we sort of promote a vitalism within the social and relational realm, where we build much more, healthy relationships between people, and we perhaps open up passages between people that is not only like, let's go shopping together or let's show each other haul videos, but actually, how do we produce these things together? Are there ways of actually opening up interfaces between people that makes them feel more seen, more recognized, more that they're actually part of a larger communal project in life than only as individual consumers that tries to sort of catch up and feel good about themselves through their consumerism, And again, how do we think about the sort of the mental realm that we actually relate to when we are designing? How do we sort of shift the perspective as designers to not only think about me as a designer and my ego and what I like, but how do I actually approach my, my customers, my users, my consumers, to try to think, well, what do you need in life? Why is it that fashion is so important to you? And how do we make it serve you better? To be to help you grow, to help you feel as if you're thriving, as if you are alive, as if you can claim a sense of agency that you may not have had in the morning when you woke up, but through these garments, you feel, that you are more connected to the world. So how are we to take this, as a perspective? In the sense, so one way to play with this is, first of all, how do we sort of not think of consumers only as these units of extraction that are connected deep into nature, and then that are going to consume our things? But first of all, how do we say, okay, let's remodel here, how do we think of consumers as someone who wants to grow? Consumers are plants. Consumers want to thrive. The people you work with want to grow. They are all small plants. How are you a gardener to sort of help them thrive, rather than think of them as sort of units that are, that you're going to satisfy your client through? So how do we sort of think more of a vitalist perspective where everything is alive in that sense, and everything, is not necessarily stuck in a process of extraction, but in the sense of that we, our purpose in each sense and in each way is to help them grow in so many ways and have them feel more vital in that sense, more alive, and have a claim of agency that is not only within the little type of platform that I sort of provide them. Another way of thinking about this is to sort of think of it as sort of a ladder of engagement. This is often how I sort of try to imagine, like, what could happen in a fashion store where the whole idea is that I'm not just coming there to consume. First of all, we can look at, well, what is a good, type of profession we could learn from? And I always play with the idea of the hairdresser. I don't use hairdressers too much, but it's always a pleasure going to the hairdresser the times I do. Hairdressing is a very sustainable practice in many ways. Of course, they use a lot of, perhaps chemicals and things that are not sustainable in the long run. But as a consumer, I come to them with more material and I leave with less. So in a sense, could I imagine coming to the fashion store with a bag of clothes and I leave with less clothes? I leave with less. How would that look like? What would happen in the store that would produce this kind of service? What happens also at the hairdresser often is that you feel renewed, you feel reborn. That's coming out. There's something's going on in there as this material is extracted from you and taken away that makes you feel more alive. You gossip a little bit, perhaps, there's all this kind of pampering of you that makes you just feel that you're just a little bit more ready for this job interview or this date or whatever is waiting for you the next hour is coming out from the hairdresser. So could we imagine that kind of experience, that sort of sense of care and that you are taken care of could be more at the center of what we imagine these services being, rather than that I just come to the store and or I click online and buy something and it shows up in the mail or something like that. So another way of thinking about it is a sort of as a ladder of engagement. I imagine it almost like a sort of a ladder where we sort of climb up through a service. And what if the fashion store would have such a, that I feel a sense of growth for each step I take? Perhaps in the entrance of the store, there is just, it's a normal fashion store. I can buy stuff. There's the latest show of some collections on the mannequins. Perhaps there's, whatever that is there. Perhaps there's a little cafe or something, all this kind of stuff that are happening in fashion stores. But what happens on the next level? Could I sort of feel that as I'm sort of stepping up, perhaps I could learn things there with the sense, I could fix things. I could change the buttons and repair holes in my garments. I can change the zipper or whatever. But I'm just getting a little bit more engaged in the way that I consume or the stuff that I have. And there are some skills that I learn, and I have a sense of agency of actually taking ownership of the stuff that I'm having, rather than I'm coming to the store only to get new things that are already ready-made, and it leaves me feeling passive. So are there ways for me to sort of, by each step, getting more and more deeper into the sort of co-design, or whatever you want to call it, but in the realm of the design that I'm in? Can I sort of feel that I'm actually getting deeper and deeper into the store, and I'm also stepping up on a sort of a ladder of learning more and more? Perhaps I come back, and deeper in the store, there's cutting tables and things, and I can learn how to make a collection or something like that, or whatever. And of course, in the end, perhaps I'm actually a co-designer of this experience, and it's almost like a tailor studio or something like that. But thinking that what happens in the store is not that it's all flat and it's all consumerism in the ready-to-wear, the type of minimal friction, minimal type of engagement, get in and out as quickly as possible, and spend your money. But could we imagine instead that there are these kind of ladders of engagement that in each sort of design field, where I could actually, have a sense of growth, and I could get to know new people, and I could meet the community, and I can be part of something that is more than myself as I'm sort of on this journey. Of course, again, this is not a cure-all, and what we most probably will see is that, and perhaps it's of course, it's already out there, that this is going to be misused for, ways to extract more, money out of people, and more, unhealthy relationships too. But I think the important part here again is just to sort of not think that, we're just going to sustain what is currently there, but we need to really challenge ourselves to how do we make our modes of engagement with consumerism and with design much more attuned to this idea that perhaps we have a possibility of growing as human beings, as social beings, as citizens, as we engage with design. And rather than think that we now have found a sort of a consumerist utopia that just needs to be reproduced and made sustainable. So what vitalism does is that it challenges to think, more like nature, if you want to say so, more like biomimicry, but also that it has a goal. The goal is thriving. The goal is aliveness. The goal is agency. How do we make the people we design for, the consumer that we design for, have an engagement in these realms to feel more vital, but at the same time, of course, with a lesser footprint on the planetary systems, with a lesser footprint on the anxieties and mental health issues that are, recurring with where we're living in the sort of consumer society we're living in. And how do we sort of try to limit those, effects that, that unfortunately where social media and consumerism is today, but also try at the same time, to learn from thriving systems and thriving, vital structures. So this is the sort of the challenge that I'm asking you to think of in that sense. Perhaps, not most of you are fashion designers, but how does this sort of a ladder of engagement, where the idea is that your consumer is getting into a relationship of growth, how would that look in the field you're in? How would you have your customer not only be someone that buys your stuff and takes it home, and there's an exchange of money, and then it's all fine and you don't want to see them again except coming back to buy more, but in a sense that you are engaged in a mutual relationship of growth? How would that change the way in your field you're looking at? What is the way in which your customer is not trying to sort of get into a relationship of zero engagements, but actually in the sense of growth and thriving, and a sense of that there's a claiming of agency and a claiming of more life, if you want to say so. So again, just to sort of sum up, how do we move beyond sustainability? How do we move beyond the troubles that we're having with the current sustainable discussions, in that sense, that it tries to sort of limit people, it tries to fix small things, and it has this kind of moralizing, lecturing of we need to make the poor, especially, make them better people, to better understand what's going on, which is not necessarily what we're trying to do. So rather, can we sort of shift the perspective there to look at vitalism as one way of trying to sort of have a goal in what we're doing, but also that is more than exactly just continuing the default settings of what we're up to. That was my little thing that I hoped to convey to you guys and have some discussions around that. All right. Thank you for listening. And I hope.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Otto. Yeah. We have some questions probably.
Oh. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You give a very vital insight us to rethink about life, pleasures, care, cure, these kind of concepts, and of course the concept of growth. That's what we have to actually reconsider. At what extent that we have to support, and at what extent we have to control. That's from different dimensions of design. And if there will be some questions from audience, or yes, please. There's a question for you. Wait a minute. Duyabilecek mi bilmiyorum. Okay. Tamam, siz söyleyin, ben onu ileteyim. Okay. I didn't understand what you're a big fan of what? Healthy material life. So it's a lab, yes. Material lab, so that we can actually integrate with well-being, maybe. He has a healthy material lab, this designer has. Maybe we can, if he can, maybe.
It will be easier if I ask directly. So let me actually rephrase my question, if you can hear me well. So I'm a big fan of the Health Material Lab in Parsons School of Design. I watch it from some of the YouTubers there. And my question was actually about what would you recommend to new entrepreneurs or designers to challenge in sustainable fashion area or scene? Thank you so much.
Oh, of course. I mean, there are amazing things happening in sustainable materials, and of course there's a lot of innovation happening there that we should not, discredit in any way. I think to me the main question there is to challenge ourselves to sort of think like how are these vectors, if you want to say so, to something more. Because what I often feel is the tricky part with the discussion around, sustainable materials in fashion and so on, is that it still takes for granted that the current types of fashion are sort of good enough. And of course, in many ways it is. I mean, perhaps I just need a sports jacket and I just love to run every day. And if it's raining a lot, I still want to run and be reasonably not wet and cold. So perhaps I need some sort of, some sort of plastic types of materials, with petrol extracted, polyesters and so on. And we can find more, healthy ways of doing that. And that is, of course, an amazing thing that we can do that. So it's not a matter that, what I'm not sort of proposing is that we should all sew our own jackets, or that we need to engage in all these processes. But I do think that the interesting part is, like, how do we combine these perspectives with each other to sort of, again, what we're doing with healthy materials is in some way, a sort of vitalism within the environmental realm, if you want to say so. How do we sort of expand that view so that the way that I'm trying to design these things are also tapping into and thinking about what is a healthy material and healthy relationship that my jacket is part of in the social realm and in the mental realm, if you want to say, how can I sort of make this, the approach that I'm having to the healthy materials in exactly the natural realm, how do I sort of make that also seep into the other ecologies? And it's more of a challenge to oneself, as I see it. And to think about, in a sense, like, how do we sort of question, again, the default setting that we are, by habit in. And again, we need to sort of, it's not that the current fashion system or design system has too many of those clues there already. We may need to sort of learn much more from what is happening within coaching, or within healing types of practices, that we actually need to be more inspired by the relationship a doctor has to the patient, for example, because the doctor tries to sort of see what is wrong, or we can also think about the coach, or even perhaps as sort of a spiritual guru or some things, because there is some suffering happening behind here too. A lot of our consumption is, of course, now I was giving an example of a very functional type of environment. It's raining, I need to run, that's my, and I need a new jacket. But a lot of consumerism we do out of unreflected types of habits. Just, I have had a long day at work, and I was giving it, I didn't have a too good day. There was too much friction, something's going on. And as I'm heading back to the metro, perhaps I just pass by the store and there's a sale, and I just buy something, just like I would buy a Snicker bar or something, just because I have low blood sugar, in a sense. I just buy something to feel that I'm sort of moving on, to feel that I'm actually just, I am not doomed to be this person I was in this morning and had a bad day with, and a lot of consumerism, I think, is very deeply connected to that, because we have made consumerism become so easily accessible, so low thresholds to actually engage in buying things. So I think we just need to sort of think about, well, how does this jacket live in a richer soil, if you want to say so, where more types of senses of growth can happen for me as a hobby athlete that runs in the morning or whatever, but also, in my mental and my emotional realms. So expanding our view, in that sense, from these healthy materials into what is a healthy social life? What is a healthy mental life? Can my product, can the things that I design somehow be parts of this sort of larger puzzle, perhaps more holistic perspective, than that I'm sort of satisfied, if you want to say so, with this kind of isolated type of ecology that we often sort of work in. So I would just, so my challenge, the challenge to you, it doesn't really answer your question. How do you sort of expand the practices you have and the inspiration you feel from the healthy materials into healthy relationships, healthy, mental realms, healthy imagination, to sort of help your customers in more, with more things, in that sense, than just focusing perhaps on eco fibers and these kind of smaller types of zero waste pattern cutting or something like that. We can expand our practices to be much more holistic in that sense. That was a long answer. That wasn't necessarily an answer, but I hope it gave you a little bit of food for thought.
Chatten kimse bir şey yazmamış galiba. Okay, maybe I might have a question. Maybe we have young assistants, academics, and students, and maybe we can think about different questions. You mentioned about growth, actually, the concept of growth, and of course, this is very natural instinct, by almost like being, the instinct of being. But about this concept of degrowth, is it just an economic concept according to you, or can we actually internalize the concept of degrowth to challenge the constraints of the ecological and social problems related to sustainability, ecological sustainability, social sustainability, also economy, actually? What do you think?
Yeah, no, but so the question of degrowth versus growth is, of course, a tension there, and as much as we need to think of degrowth in the sense of extraction, this is an important part. We definitely need to think of degrowth when it comes to the relationship the industry has to Earth, because, of course, we are overshooting the environmental boundaries that we're in. So we are consuming and producing for how many Earths it is. At the same time, first of all, we need to also think of, it's often, perhaps many of you have seen this little, this animation of like a hamster, that, oh, if the hamster was like the economy, that would continuously double every time, the hamster would be bigger than the Earth or whatever, but luckily hamsters, they stop growing after a while, so we're not, eaten up by this, so basically every living organism has sort of, finds its balance, it matures and then stays in that size. So what would be a relationship that the economy would be maturing rather than continuously growing, so that it sort of finds a size that is not over-consuming and actually overspilling and overshooting the limitations of the planet. At the same time, it's first of all, it's tricky because there are a lot of organisms that continuously grow and never stops growing. Trees, for example, is a classic example. Trees grow until they, until the wind cracks them, basically. And really, really old trees are then, so small that they're actually not endlessly growing, because they're old, because the forces of nature and erosion has actually sort of, made them smaller, but they want to continuously grow. So it's not necessarily that all types of growing systems are like hamsters. First of all, we need to see that. So what we need to talk about then is like degrowth must happen within the industry and the economy and the way that we are extracting things. There is a sense of degrowth, but we also need to sense that we cannot apply this idea of degrowth then to us, to humans, because that would be a very sad way of thinking of how we live our lives. At the same time, it's important to think that a lot of spiritual practices, for example, is a balance between growth and degrowth, if you want to say so. A lot of spiritual practices in monasteries or asceticism or, fasting, etc., is the idea that by degrowing something in your life, and that may be consumption, that may be that you live on top of a mountain in a small shed or in a cave or something like that, that there's an idea that by degrowing certain parts of your life, you may grow other parts of your life. So by actually sort of limiting the distractions that may come from material life, the idea is that I have an increased perception towards my spiritual life in that sense. By degrowing consumption and all these kind of things, that is common in spiritual practices. There's an idea that I will see and I will grow an inner life. So again, we must think about like what is it that we want to grow and what is it that we want to degrow, and how do we relate them to each other? And again, this is also tricky because I think when the Corona thing happened, the COVID came, and there was all this, we're going to lock ourselves in our houses. And there was a lot of discussions in the different, forums on the internet around fashion that, this is the moment where we will all reconsider our fashion consumption. And we will see that we don't need to buy these clothes all the time. And we can all sneak around in our athletic wear at home or something like that, and we will never buy again because now we are enlightened that we don't need fashion. And that is, of course, a sort of a misconception of things, because it's not that starvation automatically gives you enlightenment. It's not that famine suddenly produces mass enlightenment in people, in populations. It needs to have a purpose. Your fasting needs to have a purpose so that you are actually reconsidering what is important in your life and what, for this sort of spiritual thing to grow in your life, and that of course doesn't happen because you're locked up in your house involuntarily and on meeting on Zoom all the time. So we just need to see again, that just because we starve people of the possibility of consumption, that is going to, per default, make them enlightened that they actually do not need clothes, that they don't need consumerism. So that, we need to figure out then what is the balance between degrowing certain kind of systems and certain kind of parts of the economy and extraction, especially, where do we find the passages for growth then so that we compensate? Because what happens now, exactly, coming back to the 3 ecologies, is that when we talk about degrowth and we talk about industrial and economical degrowth, most people immediately connect that to a limitation in their senses of freedom, their limitation in their sense of agency, limitations in that some people are trying to put lids on their possibilities for going for holidays or feeling good about themselves, what they buy, etc., etc. So we're doing a disservice by not sort of balancing what it is we also see growing as we are degrowing the economy. So that was a long answer again to the conundrum between degrowth and growth, because I feel there's often just this idea, often coming from the sustainable fashion realm, that degrowth and slowness and limitations of all form are good for people, and that people are going to accept that and feel that is is what they want to do. And for some it can be, but definitely not for those who need social mobility and for those who we have connected their sense of agency with consumption. It's easy to be a professor and say to people that they should consume less because I'm already a professor, and I'm already middle-aged and I already have, my things. Whereas if you are, someone who is emerging, someone who is wants to head out and, be out and meeting people and go for nightclubs and all of that and live that social life, they have a totally different need in what clothing does for them, and the sense of agency and the sense of appreciation they get from other people seeing them, that we cannot just like come down and say that that's bad. We need to sort of be able to okay, so how do we do this? How do we balance your hunger for attention and appreciation with the planetary limitations that we're having? And we need to be more, creative as designers around that, so that we don't come in with too much sort of moralizations around there. Okay, again, a long answer on the question of growth and degrowth.
My question, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I want to refer sarcastic about the peak of she was very sustainable in her bonus. You gave an example, living sustainable, and that example was about the Queen of England living in the same palace for 7 years. I guess you were sarcastic, right? Because I kind of lost my, let's say, normally for the most of the times you were giving the sarcastic laugh after the other sarcastic, and that time you didn't give the laugh or give any sense of humor. Then I kind of lost my, let's say, my focus on the speech after that. Okay, if you're sarcastic, I don't have anything.
Well, no, but both. I mean, there is, of course, when we say that people should repair their things, when we say that people should be wearing the same clothes longer, when we say to people that they shouldn't change their cars, etc., there is a hierarchy of and a stratification that happens there. It is easier to live sustainably if you have a lot of money, and if you are living in a very prestigious place. when we say to people that, oh, just have one dress, yes, or whatever it is, if that is a very exclusive dress, that is so much easier to live your life in that than if we say to someone that is poor that they should only have one dress, or they should only have one pair of clothes, or they should stay in their old Fiat or car or something, So the tricky part when we think that sustainability means having one thing longer, we also have to. We just have to be careful there that we are actually giving some people the option of being sustainable, getting away with it much easier. Another example of the same kind of thing, if I'm buying Chanel and I'm buying haute couture or something like that, I am actually doing something good for the cultural economy. I am actually sustaining crafts that may otherwise be dying, or I'm actually, Chanel may be growing things for, in very sort of environmentally friendly ways. What we're doing there is that we are giving a sort of a free go. So as long as you are rich, you can buy as much as you want, and we call that sustainable because it is sustainable materials and you're supporting crafts and all these kind of things, So the Kardashians, perhaps they are sustainable because they buy really expensive stuff that is all handmade and is all fantastic couture. But when a poor person tries to do the same thing and they buy their things at H&M or wherever, the market or wherever, they are not sustainable, of course, So what we're doing is that we're looking up to the walk-in closets and the amazing consumption that the rich are doing, and we say this is beautiful and this is what we should strive for, at the same time as we, with the other hand, are slapping on the aspirations that the poor have when they're trying to replicate the behaviors that the rich are doing. So when we see the poor, or Black Friday sales here in America, people rush the stores for the sales. Look at them, how they are consuming, so unsustainable, so horrible consumerism, etc., etc. At the same time, that is the time they have a sense of agency and they can consume like the rich do every day. So we just need to be really careful here, because there is a lot of classism and a lot of acceptance of stratification and injustices that we just are sort of embedding into our sustainability discourse that we need to be a little bit more careful about. Because, as much as we may be skeptical of consumerism and so on, it does, and the way the economy works today is that is very often the place where people have a sense of agency in consuming something. People who are working 2-3 jobs and perhaps are in uniforms in each of them. They're driving delivery trucks, they're working at McDonald's or whatever they're doing. Everywhere they're told what to do, everywhere they're told what to wear. And then on Friday night, they have a sense of they can come out, they can go out and see their friends. And are we trying to tell them that they're not allowed to go and shop something cheap and wear and feel that they're in control of their lives when the rest of the economy has forbidden them any agency? So there's something really that is troublesome. We need to be really careful about as designers, as we're trying to sort of get and adjust the behaviors of the poor, or the poor, or those who are consuming. And again, yes, it is very often the middle class who actually do these hauls. It's not that it's poor people often that buy all these H&M and all these kind of clothes. Yes, it's not necessarily that it's the poor that carry so much of the have actually the possibility of engaging with what we call fast fashion. At the same time, as we're trying to regulate fast fashion, we are also stripping them of the possibilities. So we just need to be really careful here of how we're trying to sort of talk about it and where we find these solutions, because we may involuntarily be reproducing Victorian moralities and exactly favoring and running the errands that are reproducing extremely, unjust and stratified societies that may not have been our main intention as we try to address these issues. Again, a long path. Oh no, I don't hear you. Is there? Oh.
And he says, maybe you don't see, I think my old Fiat was 37 years, my dad's old Fiat accurate. I mean, it was a question about the concept of longevity and lifestyle. I think the Queen of England. Example, and actually, even though they look like very constant, from the same style, they would constantly consume, of course, example, if they are. They need the fix almost like frozen in time. So this is another concept of course action. It was just a kind of paradoxical example, I think. Maybe it's
Queen of 2021, it is 112 million pounds. Or this could be roughly 2021.
It was a kind of reflection of sense of humor about that we have to just understand that when we talk about sustainability, longevity of things, I mean, it looks like a kind of fixed price. And here I think Otto wanted to give a kind of more paradoxical example. I don't think that he was supporting it as a kind of sustainable.
No, this is not about royalty in itself.
I think, more or less, there is no other questions, I think, from the salon, and people, listened with pleasure. I can see their faces, and it was a really fascinating and very sincere speech, told for all of us as a just starting day of the Vital. That was very meaningful for us. So thank you so much again. That we are very pleased to have you here.
Oh. Thank you.
Okay, now I'm closing.
Yes, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Hepsini şuradan.